Gundam, the Japanese anime that helped make mecha a household name and gave birth to a global multimedia juggernaut, growing beyond just anime and movies to things like model kits that require a degree to understand, and video games including several fighting games like Endless Duel on the Super Nintendo or the Gundam Battle Assault series on PlayStation and the Game Boy Advance. However, there is one series that stands above the rest as its true king, and that is the Gundam Versus series of arcade games that has dominated Japanese arcades for nearly 2 decades, as well as given birth to a burgeoning community here in the States. To better understand why these games are so popular and the effect of its latest console release, Mobile Suit Gundam Extreme vs. MAXIBOOST ON, has had on the scene, I had a chance to speak with Gundam TO and community leader Brett Young to get more insight into the series, as well as understand the parallels it has with fighting games.
So Gundam Extreme Versus is a series based on the Gundam IPs. People can call it maybe an arena fighter. It's a 2-on-2 game. A lot of people like to compare it to Virtual On because it is the same kind of like that perspective. You're using a robot and you're moving around the screen, shooting stuff at the other person. But it has a lot of elements that are kind of tangential to fighting games. So, a lot of fighting game players actually have been liking it, especially in North America. But yeah, so it's a 2-on-2 team-based game. You and your partner play against an opponent and their partner. You have a team health pool. What they do is there are kind of tiers. We call them costs. So each suit has a cost value. So the more expensive your suit is, the more you deplete from the team health. So you can kind of use a grunt suit into a low-cost suit, and you can basically die multiple times. You have more lives basically to spend. Generally, you'll see teams comprising of like a big suit, and they kind of carry the game. They play forward and try and get all the muscle work done. And then you have a lower-cost suit that's there to support their partner and kind of play that support defense role. And basically you shoot each other. When you kill someone, they get knocked out and they deplete from the team pool. And when one team's total team HP gets depleted, then that team loses.
That's not it! Oh my god! The Gaga in the burst.
If we're gonna talk about this in fighting game perspectives, I would say the best way to describe it is there's not really hard combos. The game is mostly neutral. It's all about moving. Game is extremely movement oriented. And that's something that appeals to fighting game players too, right? People like to complain about set play or knockdown mix-ups or not being able to react to things, but in Gundam, a lot of that stuff is really on the down low. It's a game that really focuses on movement. Your main movement option is a boost dash, and a boost dash is you press the boost button twice in a row, and you point it in a direction and you'll just zoom in that direction. And the reason why movement is so important in Gundam is because while moving, you will generally dodge most shots. So in fighting games, we think of defense as blocking. In Gundam, defense is movement. If you're just focused on moving and dodging shots, you're probably not gonna get hit. On top of that, moving spends a resource called boost. And that's a limited resource that you never refresh. It only goes down, and once you're 0, you can't move anymore. And you only refill it when you touch the ground. When you touch the ground in Gundam, you actually enter landing recovery, and the more boost you spent, so the more you're recovering, the longer that recovery is, and that's usually where you get hit in the game. So you're kind of playing this almost like chess or board game like mind game with the opponent of like, when am I gonna land, when are you gonna land? I think he's gonna land here, I'll check with a poke here. And oh no, he didn't land there, and now I've overcommitted my movement options, because the boost dash is also what you use to attack more often. If you just press like the shoot button over and over again, there's a cooldown on it, you can't just shoot over and over again. So if you want to chain offense, you have to connect it with more boost dashes. So you fire and then you boost dash and you fire again. Movement is used on defense, but it's also how you create offense. So that's why the game is just centered on that, is you're trying to read the other guy's movement options and try and play around his stuff while also trying to, create an opening for yourself. The strategy, generally the meta a little bit of the game, is usually that you have a bigger suit that plays forward and his role is kind of to take up space. It's actually almost similar to maybe like a MOBA or something, where you have a carry and a support basically. So the easiest way to summarize it is you have a carry player and you have a support player, and we call that the front and the back. So you play front, you go in front, you try and like 1v1 the other guy's front suit, win exchanges, do what you need to do. And then the back player is playing support. He's trying to find the openings his partner's making and get the pickoffs when need be, or if his partner's getting comboed, they want to interrupt it. I love it. I think the team aspect is probably one of the things I love the most about Gundam. As opposed to, let's say, a 5-on-5 kind of genre of team game, if you're like one member on a team of 5, you're gonna feel sometimes that you're not doing that much. But in a 2-on-2 game, you're really always feeling like you can tap into your individual responsibilities, but you still have that partner aspect, which is fun. You get to make connections with your friends, and just having 4 people playing together is really fun as well. So I really love the team aspect of the game. is certainly the kind of genre that is littered with the same kinds of like, oh, blame my partner and why would you, that kind of thing. You definitely get a little bit of that, but at the same time, it's definitely a game where you see bonds really being formed. As a fighting game player, you're always focused on yourself. You only have yourself to blame, but you also are the one sharing all the burden. A lot of time you go into a community and you're having fun playing casual, sure, but at the end of the day, they're all your opponents, right? Versus in Gundam, when you're competing or when you're playing, you always have someone with you who's truly an ally of yours. I find that aspect to just be really refreshing, and I think a lot of fighting game players feel the same way. Just coming from fighting games, playing Gundam, there's a lot that is similar, and the asymmetrical, unique things about the game are really what also appeals to the player.
When I said that the Gundam Versus series dominates Japanese arcades, I'm not exaggerating. While the Extreme Versus moniker started in 2010, its roots go all the way back to 2001's Mobile Suit Gundam Federation vs. Zeon, which was developed by a team at Capcom. And while it's difficult to get hard figures of arcade sales in Japan, the Gundam Versus series was consistently ranked in the top 10 of Monthly Arcadia's rankings before its publication ended in 2015, and continues to top sales charts with each new console port released to this day. The game can be found in almost every arcade left in the country as well. For example, after Sega's closing of its Sega Ikebukuro Gigo location last year, they opened a smaller arcade across the street filled with some of the last remaining profitable genres left in arcades: claw machines, and an entire basement full of Mobile Suit Gundam Extreme Versus 2 cross-boost cabinets, the latest version in the series. This game is incredibly popular and attracts all sorts of gamers, including famous voice actress Kano Ueda, who has competed in Gundam Versus side events at multiple EVOs. But despite its popularity in Japanese arcades, the Gundam Versus series hasn't appeared much outside of its home country, unless you want to include 2015's Rise of the Incarnates, which is basically a Gundam Versus reskin, but I might actually be the last person on Earth that remembers that game. And even when you can compete in the game here in the US, the logistics involved in running a tournament aren't always favorable.
For people who don't know, Gundam is actually one of the most popular arcade games in Japan. It is super popular, it makes a lot of money. It's honestly a big part of the arcade profits for Bandai Namco, and so you typically do not see the port for the current version of the arcade come out on console because they want to make sure they reap in those profits in arcade. We always see the game come out about 2 years after the arcade version, or more typically when they announce the new version. So the pattern, which has been a pattern very rarely broken for Gundam since the PS3 era at least, is there's an arcade version, and then they announce the new version in the arcade, and then they port the old version. And so we're pretty much always at least one version behind, sometimes two even. And it is definitely tough as a community to be in that position, but I think we like the game so much that we're just happy to be playing Gundam at all, and every time the new version does come out, everyone does get excited. Recently, as things have kind of been more globalized, we see this with fighting game developers too. We have seen some mention from Bandai Namco about wanting to kind of cater more towards the Western audience and things like that. And we certainly see that with the current port of the game in Gundam. MAXIBOOST ON is one of the first English localized Extreme Versus franchise games. There was Gundam Versus and technically Gundam Extreme Force before that, but it's really big that MAXIBOOST ON has an English port. I mean, the netcode's great too, so the port itself has been a really huge boon to getting people interested in the game for sure. Whenever people ask me about running Gundam stuff, I have to start with the logistics, The fact that you generally need an online connection to even run like a lobby. So in the past, to run offline, we had to get a router and get a hotspot and transfer that into Ethernet and get everything going like that. It's always been a hassle. It's great now in the current version, it actually has an offline mode. And that's another great sign that they're actually kind of caring more about events and just trying to help us out. In the past, we've had them help us by actually giving us event builds. So for Gundam Versus in 2018, I think it was, we had Bandai Namco actually ship us a bunch of custom PS4s that had that version specific event build so we could play the game offline. But yeah, it has been quite the hassle to run the game. Not only that, but just introducing the game. It's a popular IP, but the game itself in the West just didn't really have a huge audience, so we kind of just started from scratch, just like any kind of niche fighter. When you're just starting from square one, it's gonna be hard even if you have a lot of faith in the game. So for me at least, organizing it year after year, it's been a big motivator just seeing the scene expand over time. It's been great. The scene's been bigger and more bustling than ever. Gundam is probably actually the reason why I'm so involved with Anime Evo as it is. I mean, I'm one of the founding members of Anime Evo, and my involvement with the side tournament committee has always been Gundam for the most part. I've done Guilty Gear stuff as well, but Gundam was like the thing that I did from the beginning. Running Gundam and doing all that stuff has been a large part of leading me to other opportunities and kind of getting me to be more involved in other aspects of the fighting game community for sure.
Getting into Gundam Versus can be a tad overwhelming. There are a ton of mobile suits to choose from, attacks and techniques to learn, as well as learning the ropes on how to navigate the battlefield with a partner. Thankfully, the community that surrounds these games have really banded together to create and translate invaluable resources to help newer players get into the series, a few of which I've linked in the description below if you are interested in learning how to play.
I think in the beginning I used to say Gundam was super easy. As I've taught more and more people, I've come to realize Gundam is easy in some ways, but hard in others. The fact that there's no tutorial mode is definitely tough, and the fact that there aren't very many official resources for the game definitely makes it a challenge. So that is one aspect that makes it really obvious that so many players in the community really try and get resources out to players, because it's the kind of game where you try and tell your friends about the game, you're gonna be like, once you play the game, you love it. I know very, very few people who, once they really dive into Gundam, that they walk away from it and they get bored with it. Most people I know, once they really play Gundam for enough time, they're just like, oh, this game's great. It's just all about giving those players a chance. Once they've experienced the game and kind of understand where the depth is, it's really easy to just fall in love with the game and get addicted. I think that is one of the reasons why players in the scene are so welcoming and stuff like that. I really think the community is great about that, is because everyone has experienced that thing of trying to get their friend to play the game and going through those steps. And it's an easy game to execute, but there's just so much strategy that a lot of players are learning for the first time. I would say that's one of the biggest hurdles for learning Gundam, is you try and pick up a game like, let's say KOF. If you've played a different fighting game, you know at least some things, right? You play one anime fighter, you go to the next anime fighter, a lot of stuff translates, right? Whereas in Gundam, it's really its own genre. There's really not very many other games that are anywhere remotely close to Gundam. So when you're teaching people Gundam, you have to teach them all these concepts from the ground up, and many players are just not used to not being able to access previous knowledge base. They have to learn heuristics from square one. And that is why making content to teach the game is such an uphill battle, because you just can't rely on previous knowledge. But at the same time, players have really stepped up on that and made some great resources over the years. And the fact is that there are a lot of Japanese resources for the game, because the game is played at such a high level in Japan, where it originates. And again, it's a really popular game in Japan, so it's a very interesting dichotomy, because it's a pretty niche game here, but in Japan it's one of the most popular games. And like you talk to fighting game players in Japan, they all know what Gundam is. People know the game. There's a lot of tech, there's a lot of resources in Japanese, and at the very least, a lot of people have been able to simply translate resources and made that something accessible in English for the English audience. And I think in the recent era, as we moved more and more towards YouTube, and people are understanding more and more how important it is to have a resource that's available easily on the YouTube search engine, and how digestible resources in a visual medium like video is so important. We see Japanese players also moving to that medium and creating YouTube resources, and those get translated as well. So we're at a point right now where it's easier than ever for a new player to get into Gundam, which is great. Gundam is, for me, always one step at a time process. Every year, every new version, every new opportunity, I feel like we're just getting closer and closer to making a large scene. So last year and this year, with MAXIBOOST On the console and all the opportunities that that's created, has just been yet another step. And I think it being embraced by the EVO online tournament circuit this year was really great. I had the opportunity to commentate it. Really enjoyed that. I think EVO being owned by Sony, I think, helps a lot, because they were able to kind of promote Gundam as a premier PS4 game. Bandai Namco America, after they started actually trying to market newer versions of Gundam Extreme Versus, they've reached out to players like myself and other organizers to try and be more involved. They've helped us by bringing us prizes and doing social media support for some of the grassroots events. I think it's been great for increasing the exposure to the game, and for letting the players just feel like they're being a part of something larger than themselves. So that has been great. And I'm just looking forward to more opportunities in the future. This is definitely, I've been saying this for a long time, but when you look at Gundam scene, it's just step by step, just like Uni. I mean, we were here talking about this for Uni back when Uni was small, before it got big at EVO, before it started raking in the numbers. It's a very similar thing. While the road is a little bit more long and arduous for Gundam, I really have no doubt that the players are passionate enough, the game is good enough, that it's just gonna get bigger and bigger. You know, I have a lot of faith in the game before anything else, and so that's one thing. Regardless of barrier of entry to the game, regardless of logistical difficulties, the game is good enough that it can definitely overcome all that. Because I know people who play the game, once they learn the game, I mean, they know how great it is.
Thanks for watching my dive into the Gundam Versus series. If you dug it and want to watch some more, why not check out some of the other videos on my channel? And if you have the means, consider supporting my work over at patreon.com/holdbacktoblock. Now excuse me while I try to figure out all of this.